Welcome to the Hazard Class Podcast. This is the podcast where I get to ask my stupid questions to some of the smartest people in and around the world of emergency services. My guest this week is a filmmaker who's crafted countless films, including when he embedded himself with the Detroit Fire Department to direct, in my opinion, what is the greatest documentation of the fire service and its culture ever captured on film, Burn. And now, most recently, he's followed a group of paramedics from across the country to document their story and their challenges in his new film, Into the Unknown, which will be released in 2025. My guest this week, Mr. Tom Putnam. Today, we're going to talk about his story, his process, and how he can so consistently and accurately capture the culture of the groups that he follows. I can't wait for this conversation. Let's get into it. Tom, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, yeah, it's an honor. Honestly, Burn has been one of my favorite films since I first saw it years and years ago. And obviously going through my journey as a fireman and working in EMS, it's been just like the pinnacle. I know my community, the firefighters that I know, love it. It is the staple of documentary filmmaking as far as we're concerned. So I appreciate it, really. As the format of this podcast goes, we will open up the episode with our wheel of stupid questions. It's a constant reminder that when you ask questions, you're going to get good results, especially if you can point them at the right people. So with that, we'll hit the wheel of stupid questions.
Spin that wheel of stupid questions.
Here we go, the wheel.
It's a real wheel, people.
It is a real wheel. I'm so happy. Me and Tom talked just before this. I was like, there's a couple questions that I really hope we get. Okay.
As long
In
as
the
it's not
movie,
a mustache comparison.
I have a lot to live up to.
I don't know.
In the movie Rambo: First Blood, is John Rambo the good guy or the bad guy?
Having just rewatched that like 3 weeks ago,
Oh, wonderful.
I think he's the good guy, right? I mean, he's damaged, but he's not. He doesn't, like he keeps saying, he doesn't want to start problems. He just wants to go and visit his friend.
Yeah, it's I've spent a lot of time over the firehouse table talking about Rambo, and most of us, I think, agree that he was the good guy and that they pushed him to the edge. And man, what a great movie! It's funny you just watched it, but I think there's a case to be made that he's the bad guy. I mean, if you want to take that angle, but I don't think that's nearly as fun of an angle.
No, I think he's the good guy. I mean, also, like, having just rewatched it, the scene at the end where he breaks down crying in like what's left of the police station. When do you see that in action movies anymore? The guy just had a nervous breakdown on camera. It's so good.
Well, the depth of storytelling at that point in movie making, right? It wasn't just like a bang bang visual effects shoot 'em up. There was depth behind the story, which is why it still resonates. 30 years later or 40 years later, maybe even. I don't know how long.
Yeah, and it's weird that it's not cartoony, even though the guy takes out a helicopter with a rock. Like,
how do you? Well, it's Rambo. That's the explanation, I think.
And the thing where he jumps in the tree. I happen to love First Blood a lot. So.
Oh, awesome! That's hilarious. And there's 20 some options on this wheel, and it happened to be the one I was hoping you'd get. Right. So we'll get past the stupid wheel. So I want to talk about the man behind the camera. What got you started? Why filmmaking? How did you get into filmmaking?
Oh, nobody's ever asked me that, actually. I was one of those just nerdy kids who was really into making movies, like with my Super 8 camera back in the 80s, and ended up, the two things I was really interested in were film and journalism. And I went to college at USC, University of Southern California, and ended up majoring in film and in journalism. And documentaries ended up being a kind of awesome way to put those two things together.
So in your career, I kind of looking through the discography, like you've done feature films and you've done documentaries, especially now knowing about your history of journalism. Do you have a preference? How do you choose the next project?
Oh man, for me, I think it's whatever tells the story best. Um, Feature films in some ways are better because it's a much you film for like 4 weeks and
Hmm.
then it's over. Documentaries can take years. Burn X, which just came out a little while ago, that ended up taking 12 years to make. So they take longer, but on the flip side, documentaries don't have actors, so they're automatically like 50% easier and less stressful.
Yeah.
So, they each have their pros and cons. I like to think that when I'm doing a fiction film, it kind of feels like a documentary. And when I'm doing a documentary, it's usually like widescreen, big sound, steady
Hmm.
cam, aerial shots. So hopefully the documentaries kind of feel like a feature film.
They definitely have that effect. So, when you're working on a documentary, obviously there's these through lines you're trying to capture. What's the process like to crafting a story in a documentary? Because you want to have some sort of arc, but you also, do you come in with an agenda? Are you just kind of riding the wave? How's this work?
I always come in with an agenda and it gets thrown out the window usually pretty quickly. I So there's kind of two kinds of documentaries. There's documentaries where people are telling you a story about something that already happened, and it's usually a lot of people sitting and talking, and they have like old archival footage. That's not really what I do. I like to think of myself more as an investigative journalist. So I tend to find an interesting group of people or a subject, and then just start filming them and following them and seeing where the story goes. To me, that's the fun part or the interesting part. Um, and somehow the movies weirdly always sort of end up beginning and ending the way I thought they would when I started, but then everything in between is all the stuff you never could have anticipated. I mean, Burn's a great example where it when we knew how it would start, I had this idea that it might end with just feeling like those guys are just when you finish watching the movie, those guys are out there right now fighting a fire, and that is amazingly how it ended. But I mean, everything in between of the various main characters, we didn't even know any of those people existed when we started the movie.
And especially in the terms of Burn, like there's significant life events that happen to these people, and especially the characters that you grow to love and know, and then these major events happen. Like it, I don't want to say the word fortunate because obviously they're both of the things that I'm referring to in terms of Burn are very unfortunate events, right? Terrible, yeah, terrible. But the way that it drives you into the depth of the narrative is something that's special, especially in Burn, right? These events happen, and all of a sudden you're just sucked into this world of these people being very real and alive and raw.
I gotta hope so, and that's nice to hear. I think what most people don't know when they see it, because it just sort of feels like, hey, we were there and the cameras were rolling and there's this luck and things happened in front of us. What most people don't know is that we actually filmed about 1,000 hours for that movie, and we started off filming about 30 different Detroit firefighters and family members and people in the city government. There are people we filmed with for a year and a half that might have a line in the movie. And part of the reason we did that was we didn't know who was going to have something good or bad happen to them. And Dave Parnell, who's one of the main characters, we all knew from the first sentence that came out of his mouth, oh, this guy's totally in the movie in a major way. So he was our one sort of like known. And then a lot of the other things you see are because we just kept filming all of these other people. And then as things would happen, we would sort of start to focus on some people versus others. That's part of the reason Burn X exists, is that we had so many great stories that there was just no room for it all in the first film, especially stories that branched out to arson investigation, to family relationships, to the generations of Detroit firefighters who were doing the job, and some of the other challenges with the city government. And we kept filming after the movie was over for another 10 years because we loved the guys. And people, a little behind the scenes, like people kept coming to us saying, hey, we want to make a TV show out of this. So we kept filming, think we were going to make a TV show, and it just never happened. So with all of that additional 10, 12 years of filming, ended up with a whole other movie out of it, where you see characters who were main characters in the first movie are now sort of supporting characters in the second film, which is, I think, just sort of an expansion of that world.
So before all this, did you have kind of an interest in emergency response, or was this like you did burn and all of a sudden you fell in love with these characters and now this is blossomed from that?
I grew up in rural Oregon, and when I was in kindergarten, what is that, like 4 years old, 4 or 5 years old?
Yeah.
Our house burned down.
Oh, no.
And where we lived, which again was rural, we had to have the county fire department come, and it took them an hour to get there. And that's as you can imagine, like a pretty formative moment for a little kid
Yeah.
to sit in your driveway and watch your house burn down because people hadn't voted for, or they hadn't voted to increase their taxes in order to have proper fire service. So that made an impression on me. And I make documentaries. And I had read a story about a Detroit firefighter named Walter Harris who was killed in the collapse of an abandoned building, married to his high school sweetheart, had 7 kids. It turned out his transponder wasn't working. And I asked a question that I think most people who aren't from Detroit or familiar with it are going to ask, which is, why is somebody risking their life fighting a fire inside an abandoned building? And this story was really like a 12-year process to answer that question because it's a complicated answer. And I think it's also an important answer. And it ended up becoming something that firefighters all around the world could relate to because what I didn't know going into it was that nobody had really spent significant time with firefighters and told their story in a really personal way. And, you spend, I mean, for me, I was curious about that question and then went to Detroit, got put with Engine 50, which is the firehouse in the first film, completely randomly. They just picked a firehouse and put us there. Found out later it's the busiest firehouse in Detroit, or it was at the time. And on our first shift, I think we went to first 2 shifts, we went to 20 structure fires.
Oh my goodness.
Which is like our car caught on fire. I mean, it was insane. And after that first 4-day trip, everybody was in. There's obviously a huge story here. So from that moment on, I think I sort of had the bug and could not believe there weren't 50 camera crews telling these stories. And I think, as I'm sure you and most of your listeners know, firefighters can be great about talking to each other, but they're not great about letting other people in. So I also sort of felt honored to be allowed in to tell those stories and be given a certain amount of trust. So those stories have just sort of continued to find me.
Yeah, that you bring up an exact question that I have here for you. What was the process like of getting those firefighters and now EMS workers to open up to you and let you into the community? Because I know from being on the inside, if we had a journalist show up and wanted us to start talking, the interviews are going to be a little bit different than what you end up capturing. How did you get to break down the walls to get to the point where people are really telling you the truth?
Yeah, I mean, so we showed up at Engine 50 and the city, Detroit, didn't tell them we were coming. So we show up with a 7-person crew and cameras. And we explained to Craig Doherty, who was the captain there at the time, he's a big part of the first movie, what we were doing. And we had permission from the city. So all the firefighters were like, wait here. So we waited in the lunchroom. No, we waited in the engine bay. They all went in the mess hall. And we're like, do we want to do this? Or should we tell them to take a hike? And to this day, I don't know why they said yes, but all of the guys on the shift, all but one said yes. One guy didn't want to be filmed, and we've filmed around him for 10 years.
Wow.
He's not in one frame of the movie. And they just, for whatever reason, they just sort of figured, let's take a flyer on these folks. And I think from there, the secret sauce ended up being the questions we asked, because it wasn't the questions they normally get asked. News shows up and they're asked about a certain thing, or they're looking for the salacious story or complaints or what have you. And we just filmed them and got to know them over the course of a year. And I think they got to know us and see that we were hopefully people that really did care about what was happening. And we weren't just parachuting in, doing a couple days of filming and leaving. So I think just over time, they got to trust us. And I mean, now it's go to weddings, go to funerals, and lifelong friends with a lot of the men and women that we filmed.
I couldn't agree more with the idea that the questions you asked were the right ones. How did you come up with them? Was that a process of you just being around them long enough where you started to understand what they wanted to talk about, or how did you get there?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of things. So the first two Burn movies are co-directed with myself and Brenna Sanchez. Brenna grew up in Detroit. She knew the city. All of these fires were no surprise to her. I'd never been to Detroit. I had experience with fire in my own life, but it was kind of a great combination in that she knew the sort of ins and outs of the city and the environment and the politics, and I could come in as an outsider and just be like, why the hell are you guys on the roof of a burning building, multiple times a night with no oxygen tanks, by the way, when there's nobody in the building? And and I think the answers ended up being complicated for why that happens. And there was something else that happened. So we went and we did this shoot for 5 days early on, and it was actually funded by PBS, who gave us a little bit of money and said, hey, we want to see if there's enough fires here to tell a compelling story. And we ended up with like an insane number of fires. And PBS ended up passing on the project, as did everybody. We pitched every broadcaster on the planet. And if that's interesting, we could talk more about why they passed. But we felt like there was a really strong story there. So we took the little 10-minute piece we had made to show PBS and we put it online with a little donate now button, not knowing how the fire service would feel. And it was crazy. It blew up, millions of views, people donating every few minutes. It got picked up by every major publication you can think of, from the Atlantic to the Wall Street Journal to the Sun in the UK. And I think something special happened there that I still don't fully understand, that really helped create a groundswell within the fire service worldwide. I think part of it was the intimate portion of these people. I'd like to think part of it was the quality of the storytelling. And I think, honestly, a lot of it was there was a new generation of cameras that had just come out. We took them out of the boxes in Detroit. They met us there, that allowed you to film in low light and put cameras on guys' helmets. And we were the first people to do that. And I don't think anybody had ever seen a camera go into fires and capture what it was really like. And I think that part of it, the sort of action movie part, also really captured people's imagination.
That it couldn't be more true, right? You watch these not to put anyone on blast particularly, but TV shows and movies, and what they portray is just not reality. It's just it's sensationalized or over dramatized. And what's crazy to me is that you can do something that's so raw and real, and then that resonates differently than the sensationalized drama of this explosion and that explosion, but the real story, the real people. And then as an actual firefighter, this is what it looks like. I remember talking to my wife and being like, that's what it looks like when you go in a house fire. It's not like Backdraft when everyone's walking around with no mask on or whatever it is. Yeah, and you got the person over your shoulder, whatever it is. No, you can't see. It's hot. This is what it's going on. And that view to the other side of this unseeable world is just interesting and marvelous that it's capturable, right?
Well, and I think, anytime that America likes to call people heroes, it's look out, bud, you're about to get screwed in some way. And I think we love to call firefighters heroes. And I think as a result, when people tell those stories, they want to paint firefighters in a very two-dimensional way. And what we wanted to do is show a much more accurate picture of who these guys are. When's the last time you saw something about firefighters where you see them smoking? Or you see that, no, they swear, or they have family problems, or they don't always win. There's a little girl that dies in Burn, and it was devastating for the department, but that's the reality of the job. And I think, to me, showing a realistic human version of people makes them much more heroic, because they're, as firefighters aren't superheroes. What makes them, to me, truly heroic is they're everyday people who do something extraordinary. And especially, in this day and age when people, I think selfishness is at an all-time high, or a lack of understanding your community or wanting to support people you don't know, to see people who come from all walks of life, who risk their life multiple times a night for total strangers and their property, I just think is such a special thing.
Yeah. And in doing that, you are, a megaphone for the community. I don't know if you feel like that, but I've talked to so many people that have been like, watch burn or show their wife or their mom or someone inside the community says, this is what my work looks like. I know that when I get in my truck and drive to work and then I come back, you can imagine what my life is like, but you've never seen it. And all of a sudden now you have like this crystal clear video of saying, this is exactly what it looks like when I go to work, which was previously, unless you're coming to do a ride along or something like that, it was an unattainable thing. And so all of a sudden now these people that wish they could tell their story have like this visual medium to do it to the people in their lives, which is just like unbelievable.
Right. There was a thing that started happening the first few burn screenings that I don't think none of us expected, where you'd leave the theater, firefighters would come, and if you remember when it came out, people would come like multiple nights, and they'd come the first night with their buddies and then bring their families back. The second night, it was amazing. But a thing would happen where you'd go in the lobby, and there'd pretty typically be 5 or 6 firefighters, and their wives would be kind of chewing them out. Like, that's the job. That's what you do. I thought you just like hung out and watched football, and like occasionally you got like a fender bender or something.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really interesting thing that we didn't expect, which is also why I tried to focus more on wives and families in the second film. Was it's an incredibly stressful job for the people who were around and supporting firefighters. And it was an amazing thing to see people, guys who've been married for 20 years, their families still didn't necessarily understand what they did until they saw the movie and could, like you said, go virtually on a ride along.
Yeah. So that brings me right to my next point. So I was fortunate enough, Tom sent me the ability to watch the new movie, Into the Unknown. And it was great. It was Burn, but for EMS. It was everything I hoped it would be when he talked to me first about this new film. And it perfectly captures the culture. It was, I talked to one of my coworkers last night, and I was like, it felt like I was at work, which is like the biggest comment I can give you. I don't want that to sound, I don't want that to say, to sound bad, but it was so perfectly encompassing of the way it feels to go on these runs and have the frustrations that are talked about through the film, that it was just, it felt like I was at work. Like, it was like I could have someone watch this and they would know what it's like to work on an ambulance. Like, and it was perfect. Right. It was. So that brings me to kind of this question, right? We'll talk a bunch about Into the Unknown because I have questions. I just watched it. I have questions, but
sure.
Spanning through these documentaries, what do you do to capture the culture? It's something you so consistently nail that it must be thought about like very diligently, because it's so consistent that you nail the culture, which is so hard to do.
I mean, I think it's a combination of things. I'm a pretty easy person to talk to. I like to think I'm pretty empathetic. I also know when to shut up and just let people keep talking. I learned that's one thing I learned from journalism school is if you're sitting and talking to somebody and I stop talking, it's human nature. They're going to keep talking. And I mean, I did a movie about World War II veterans. It was my first doc. It's called Red, White, Black, and Blue. And it ended up getting called like the best look at the effects of combat on soldiers ever committed to film. And it was just me not talking, because you get a guy who hasn't talked about being in combat for, at that time, 60, 70 years. When you're not talking, people take you to crazy places. I had guys sit and tell me about executing POWs or having the other 59 guys in their platoon get killed and them being the only person that survived. And I think it's about just being quiet and letting people tell their stories. It really is that simple. I think it's also about, in a world where you can go on YouTube and see literally 1,000,001 like helmet cams or little documentaries about firefighters or paramedics or here's my job. And I think it's about getting creative and finding enough budget and finding the kind of crew members that can make what I call like a movie, because I constantly hear like, why is it taking you so long to make this movie? My cousin came out with us last week and it's already on YouTube. And it's like, well, that's a different thing. I'm trying to tell like a big story that feels like a movie. And I think that it's about being willing to spend that time and find amazing partners who are willing to frankly pay for that. Which is not easy because you're talking about something where you don't know what's going to happen. You know, you're filming something where what if your main characters get hurt or die or do something awful happens, and it's kind of a high wire act, but to me that's kind of the fun of it. Why go start something if you know exactly how it's going to end? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. It's that was just the thing that resonated with me so much watching that film, Into the Unknown. It was just like, wow. Like, that'll bring me to my next question here, which is, how did you get permission to do it? I don't even understand. I was watching it go. I was like, there was scenes in the film where my jaw was at the floor going, I can't believe this has been committed to film. It's unbelievable. What's not allowable, because that sounds negative, but it's like the fact that you're really there, it feels like you're in the room. I don't know it's possible. So talk through that process.
Yeah. I'm probably a world expert on HIPAA laws now. I could teach a graduate level class. It's funny. I thought burn would be the hardest thing I ever did. And then I got into the unknown, where it's like burn, but dealing with HIPAA. And I mean, every department in that movie has a different set of laws. If it's fee for service, there's one set of laws. If it's hospital based, it's one set of laws. If it's fire based, it's one set of laws. We had a team of attorneys. It was more than a year. I'm getting an upset stomach just remembering this. It was more than a year of just trying to figure out how to do it, because every single department, and by the way, we had talked to like 50 departments to end up with the 5 that are in the movie. And we wanted it to feel like a real cross section. So Into the Unknown is like burn, but for EMS. And there's hospital-based EMS. There's a private ambulance company. There's fire-based. There's air ops. There's a volunteer department. And then there's other people, the former Surgeon General. There's a whole section with dispatchers, which even with all my work with the fire service, I didn't have a clue how hairy that job is and how stressful and what sort of toll it takes. So it was really a case of like every single department, we had a like very narrow set of rules to follow. I mean, I can't talk about, and you would not believe the stuff that we couldn't put in the movie. And, you know, the movie opens with, 10 seconds into the movie, you drop into, I think, one of the hairiest things I've ever seen in any documentary. And
absolutely,
it was hard.
It was. I was like, wow, 0 to 1,000 right here. Wow, right? Holy cow.
But that's what but that was, I think, really important, because I wanted people to see it. And it's as you see in the movie, like, it's incredibly rewarding. It's incredibly difficult. It's messy beyond anything I could imagine. And it was also very important that we had to be very, very careful with not just our paramedic subjects, but our all of these people who called for an ambulance had no idea it was going to come with a film crew, and they're having the worst day of their life. So, you know, we had on each of those departments, we had a member from the legal department in that department with us. We'd have to clear the locations and get permission before we started filming. And if people said no, we walked away, even if it was something that was like, oh my God, I'm going to win an Oscar if we film this. You would just have to honor people's wishes. And and I think there's, in the same way with Burn, when people were like, oh my God, I'm going into a fire, I've never seen it like this. I think this shows that as a result of all of that work and the amazing, amazing producers we had on board, from former Surgeon General Richard Carmona to Randy Mantooth and Kevin Teig, who starred in Emergency, to our on-the-ground producers, Tanya Mantooth, Baxter Larman, who teaches at UCLA and has taught literally tens of thousands of paramedics how to do their job, to Steve Martin, who was chief at LA County Fire. So we walked in like really, really locked down in terms of what we could and couldn't show. But it was hard. In the same way we shot 1,000 hours for Burn because we didn't know what would happen. We just had to film and film and film with all these 5 different departments because you never knew what we'd be able to show and not show until like we found out if people were okay with us filming. But I think as a result, we got some pretty amazing moments that show the best that job can get and the absolute worst that job can get.
Yeah, you do. And it really, I don't know how to describe it other than it feels like you're on a ride along. You're there. You're like, it's so guttural and like real and raw. And you're in the room while this procedure is happening or whatever might be happening. And especially for someone that maybe had never seen it, it's going to be unbelievable. Like I feel like I said, when I watch it, I feel like I'm at work. I'm like, wow, I've been to that call and I've been to this call and I've been to this call. And just seeing it now unfold on screen is just like, wow, this whole community of, people that say, oh, now EMS is this or that. Now they're going to see what it is, right? They're going to have the lens to view it for what it is. And these storylines kind of emerge throughout the movie. And like, I would say the gripes that you see consistently pop up are unique in the fact that oftentimes there's not a mouthpiece for those because, departments might suppress them or they might say, well, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to do something else. But your film hits on all the things that we were always talking about in the firehouse that isn't, politically advantageous to talk about, in the news media, but they're real and they're the actual things that are burning people out and causing people to, struggle in the profession. And so what was it like to be able to get those points to be able to go across without like suppression? Because it really feels untethered in the movie.
Thank you. I think, that credit goes to the people we filmed and their willingness to be vulnerable with us. I think, I knew from coming out of Burn frankly, how much harder the job has become and how much higher the turnover has been. But then I also knew as difficult as we showed the job being in Burn, after the movie came out, applications to that department went through the roof. So in talking with paramedics in these different EMS departments, as I'm sure anybody watching this knows, recruiting has just dropped through the floor and it's getting so hard. But I am also a firm believer that if you show the rewards of the job for the right person, it's the best job in the world. What other job outside of like fire and EMS, law enforcement as well, but it's a different animal, can you help people like this, especially in an era when I think people see all these problems in our world that feel so helpless to do something about it. We shot Into the Unknown, and that was what all these departments said. Hey, we're giving you access because we're hoping you're going to show a realistic look, but also show the rewards. And people who never thought about this job will want to do this job. And actually, our assistant camera person, who's a lifelong film industry person, got out of the film industry, enrolled at UCLA, got his EMT, and is like doing that job now. So
wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. So I feel like once the movie comes out, you're going to have those people in every audience that are just, oh, that's for me. That's what I want to do. And, I want it to be like a Top Gun, but like a realistic version of that for EMS. Oh, is that such a cheesy thing to say?
No, it's perfect.
Sorry, I won't be ashamed of my love of Top Gun.
No, it's great.
But like Top Gun is like the Hollywood version. And I feel like this version, you definitely see the hard parts about the job. And the thing that I didn't know coming out of COVID, if we're ever out of COVID, is the mental health challenges that first responders have. So we spend a chunk of the movie in Southern Oregon on a ranch called Chiron Ranch that specializes in therapy for first responders. And seeing that side of things and seeing the toll this job is taking 30 years of trauma and now packing it into 10 years for people is really, to me, the scariest thing in that movie. The scariest part isn't the calls. It's seeing the toll it's taking on the people that we rely on to, save our lives when somebody calls 911. And I'm very hopeful that in the way that I think Vern helped change laws around the country for first responders, this will help like really give a good kick in the pants to laws to support mental health counseling and turnaround times and destigmatizing talking about, that slip I've seen so many friends in the fire and EMS service go through, where it's like, whether it's drinking or drugs or gambling or pornography or it's not talking to your friends and isolating, that I think is something that is not really on the radar of like the average person who isn't exposed to this job. And I think when they see that, they're going to want to help.
And I think that that's the realness in the film that isn't capturable in like traditional media. When you say like, oh, Chicago fire or whatever, like it's not sexy to talk about the hard. But the hard is what is reality. And so to put a face to these people that are doing this work, you have to see it in totality. And I think that that's what these movies do that's different than the other media of emergency response, right?
Yeah. But I think it's an interesting thing because people saw Burn and responded in a major way. I feel like that's going to happen with Into the Unknown, but it's been an interesting thing. So we've been sending Into the Unknown out to different film festivals to like figure out like, hey, should we premiere it at a film festival? And we keep getting this messaging back that we love the movie, but it's too much. It's too intense. It's too this, it's too that. And it's like, well, I'm not making a Marvel movie,
Yeah.
And the same thing happened with Burn. And yet once it got out into the world, people would come and see it night after night and bring their friends and family. And doing Into the Unknown now 12 years later, it's a weird thing. You walk into a firehouse and I'll have my old ratty old Burn t-shirt on and they're like, did you work on Burn? I saw that when I was a kid. That's why I'm here. And and so I hope that, the audience will just sort of prove like the big Hollywood gatekeepers wrong in the same way they did on Burn.
I think so. Like I said, I can't overemphasize, and I'm not just saying it because I'm talking to you, but the movie was great. It was great, and everyone should see it because it is the truest and realest look into the realities of the EMS system in America right now that I've ever seen. I've never seen anything that's really even comparable to it when it comes to that.
And I think people don't know, right? They just think they're going to call 911 and everyone's going to come and they're going to be well rested and properly trained and have all the equipment they need. And I think when people find out the system's overloaded, when I talk to people in it's in the movie a couple times with a couple different departments where you see the number of calls has gone up 400%, but the staffing has gone down 25%. Hey man, I got a C- in math in high school. Like I'm a genius, but I know that those are bad numbers.
Yeah. They are, and it's all too often in the emergency services right now.
What? Yeah. That's an interesting thing that I didn't realize. From the smallest volunteer department to the seemingly best funded, Central California department, everybody is hurting, and I hope this can help in some way. We're partnered with some of the biggest EMS and first responder nonprofits in the country too. So in educating people, there's a huge give back component too. And I'm excited to be able to get this out into the world and actually have like some tangible sort of results come from it.
Yeah, and I think you will. I don't want to steal your whole day, so tell them where they can see the film, where they can see your other work. And then I'll let you leave me.
Okay. Thank you for having me. If you want to check out the Burn films, if you want to check out the Burn movies, there's 3 of them. You can go to DetroitFirefilm.org. And if you want to get a sneak peek at Into the Unknown and get on the mailing list to find out when it's going to be coming your way, you can go to intotheunknowndoc.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your commitment to telling and capturing our stories, our culture, and giving the public kind of a chance to see behind the curtain that they would never have previously had without the work that you're doing. I'm really appreciative of it, and I really admire what you're doing.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks for everything you're doing and for having me on to flap my gums a little bit.
Of course. I appreciate it. Thank you.